What's going on, people? For today's episode, we're going to go a deeper look at how to request something in English. Check it out. So, before we actually get to the meat of the topic, let us do some quick reflection. Using your own language, just think about it. Using your own language, just think about it. How would you ask request for? First, someone that you are very close with, maybe your sister, your younger brother, maybe your cousin, or maybe your parents, right? Second, someone you are not very familiar with. Maybe your boss, maybe your supervisor, or maybe someone you just happen to talk to in the streets. Another thing that I want you to reflect on is how would you request something depending on how big the request is. For example, how would you request if you want someone to pass you the salt or pepper? Or how would you ask the request if you're asking for a vacation or maybe a raise from your job? So those two things are something that you have to think about. Chances are in your own language, you'd most likely ask the request or the way you ask a request differently depending on who you're talking to, and at the same time depending or how big the request is. So in English, it is the same depending on who you're talking to, number one, and second, the type of request would posit or would give you a different kind of way or a different phrase to ask a request from someone. Now, with that said, we can proceed now with the phrases that we can use to request something in English. What I'm going to do right now is basically divide these phrases into three parts. Namely, we have the short phrase, the first one. Second is we have the medium phrase. And then the third one, we have the long phrase. Now, what's the difference between those three phrases? The short phrase are basically your type of request or the phrases that you would use if you have a small request and at the same time you're talking to someone you're very familiar with or you're very close with. It could be passing the salt or maybe passing the pepper shaker, right? Or maybe opening up the window. And then at the same time, you're probably talking to someone who's you're very close with, maybe your best friend or maybe someone in the family, someone you're very close with, close friend. The second phrase or the medium phrase are those types of requests that seem to be hard or maybe easy, somewhere in between, but it's kind of blurry. We're not really sure if that is an easy request or a hard or a big request, right? So that's why it's a medium request. It could be maybe feeding the cats or maybe calling the bank or what have you. Again, this is depending on your situation. Maybe in your own terms, feeding the cat would be hard, or perhaps, feeding your fish, or maybe even opening the window might be hard. And again, it also depends on who you're talking to. One of the things that you should be mindful of is, again, that's one of the reasons why I said two things. Aside from the type of request you're requesting for, you have to look at your relationship with that person who you're asking a request for. So very, very important. And then the third type of request, or what I call the long request, are those type of requests wherein you're very careful, you're hedging, a lot of hedging, or again, being careful, or you're tiptoeing, or I would say you're walking on eggshells. Idiom. And the type of requests are bigger. So it could be you're asking for a vacation, or maybe you're asking your boss to give you a raise and you're talking to someone you're not very close with. Again, you have to always think of those two factors, the person you're talking to and then the type of request. Now, with that said, for the short request, we can use requests such as, first one, could you? You can also ask, can you? Now, the difference between those two things are not very big. They're almost very similar. Can, most of the time we'd use when we're asking for permission, such as can I go to the washroom, or can I leave the meeting right now, things like that. But you can really, it's totally okay to ask can. And also can is something that you're asking when you are asking if someone is able to do it, such as can you fly this thing, can you fly an airplane, or can you drive, things like that. But you can definitely use can and could interchangeably. That's totally fine. So you can ask can you, could you, or would you. Those are very polite way of asking things. And again, you'd use that for the short phrase. Also, one more thing. When you're asking could you, would you, and can you, it's followed by a simple tense verb. So, could you pass me the salt? Could you feed the fishes? Could you open the window? So for the second phrase, or the medium phrase, we can use phrases such as do you mind? Do you think? I was wondering if, and then your verb phrase. So for do you mind, you can even have the present progressive form. Do you mind cleaning, or do you mind opening the window, right? This window here, right? Do you mind opening the window? I was wondering if you could open the window. Do you think you can open the window, right? So that would be the second or the medium phrase. It's longer than the first one. So for the third phrase or the long phrase, you can use phrases such as I was wondering if you could. Do you think it's possible? I was wondering if it's possible, right? So what's happening is it becomes longer. It becomes longer because you're becoming more careful because the type of request is big, or may end at the same time. The person you're asking request for is someone you're not very close with. And you can look at it this way. The smaller the request is and the closer you are to that person who you're asking a request for, the shorter phrase you can use for that particular type of request. In contrast, if you are asking for a big request and again you are talking to someone you are not very close with, then you're becoming more careful, and because you're becoming more careful, the phrase that you would use to ask, right, for that particular request is going to be longer. So you might want to use the second one, or the medium phrase, or I would call it the long phrase, the third one. So that is how you would do it. And because it's a long list, right, I'll give you a quick recap. I have my cheat sheet here. So for short phrases, again, you can use can you, could you, or would you. The medium phrase, or the second one, right, you can use phrases such as do you mind, do you think, I was wondering if you could. And then for the third one, or the long phrase, you can use phrases such as would it be possible, do you think it's possible, or I was wondering if it's possible. Again, some of them are actually not necessarily a question, but how we ask it, it becomes a question. So such as I was wondering if it's possible. That is actually a statement, but because you're asking, you can definitely ask that. That becomes a question. So I was wondering if it's possible for you to pass the salt. That is very, very careful way of asking for someone to pass you the salt. So use those phrases. You can experiment those phrases that I gave you, and you try to use it depending on those two factors that I said. Now, with that said, I guess this is another episode of Casspeak. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoyed this spanking new video quality that we have. And at the same time, I want to remind everyone that's watching this that we are having free classes twice a week, Wednesday and Saturday, from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. I believe I changed the time now, but it's going to be again 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. and it's going to be via Zoom. And I implore you guys to join. It's fun. You get to practice your speaking, your listening, your grammar as well. Again, I do provide a lot of activities in those classes. And please join. And if you have any questions, you can just comment down below. If you have any ESL tips, or perhaps ESL questions rather, that you want to ask, simply message me in Casti at Casspeak.com, or ask me from the social media platforms that I have down below. Again, I'm signing off. This is again your teacher, your friend, and your boy, Casty, here in Casspeak. I'll see you next time. Bye.